morning, and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin, here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is remembering wholeness. What if we're already whole? What if there's nothing to fix? That's really what we're going to be looking at today. And what if it's just a matter of remembering? So it should be a fun conversation. Before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling as you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today we're talking about remembering wholeness. Good morning, Shosha. Wonderful to have you here with us this morning, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us. So, what if we're already whole? What if there's nothing wrong? And what if we just need to remember, like reassemble ourselves in a more conscious and deliberate way? So one of the things that I notice is that many of us have a pattern of exiling parts of ourselves or denying parts of ourselves. So there's something that we don't like, we shunt it away, put it in a box, put it out of our attention, pretend it's not part of us, or we judge it or value it as bad. And what if instead we could remember, reclaim these parts of ourselves to recognize our wholeness? Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you with us this morning. So, what I'm talking about is when we do something that we don't like, maybe even that we feel ashamed of, we might judge ourselves for that, right? We might berate ourselves and devalue ourselves as a result of that, rather than looking at that experience as an opportunity to grow and become more whole. So to reincorporate these parts of ourselves that we might consider to be shadow parts enables us to be complete, enables us to be integrated. I guess that's the word, is to be integrated rather than fractioned or fractured. And the fracturing is an illusion, but it occurs because we judge and sort of separate ourselves from ourselves. So what if we were to for instance, notice when we get angry at something, and even maybe even especially if it's a disproportionate emotional response to something, rather than seeing it, judging it as bad or wrong, to be able to look at that expression and that experience with compassion. And from that space of compassion, look at what's the message, what's underlying, what is available to us that this response opens up to our awareness. So as a communication from our other, maybe other than conscious awareness, a communication that allows us to deepen our connection with ourselves rather than to further fraction it or fracture it. So rather than berating ourselves for doing something that we didn't like or acting in a way that we didn't like, or thinking that something is wrong with us, what we can do instead, perhaps, would be to say, well, what's going on here? Where did that response come from? To use it as an opportunity. So one of the things that I say with my clients, and for myself too, is if it's coming up to heal. So these emotions, anxieties, upsets, anger, sadness, all of these things are coming up to be a communication, because how would our higher selves communicate with us? Well, potentially through physical experience, maybe through circumstance, maybe through coincidence, like things that, like a song shows up out of nowhere, for instance, or different times on the clock that we become aware of, or numbers or license plates, but also through emotions and through physical sensations and through thoughts. So if we can allow ourselves to be witness to our experience, to be witness to our emotions, to be witness to the physical sensations that we experience, then maybe we can interact with those experiences as deepening opportunities to remember, to put back together pieces that we might have exiled. So one of the things that I notice when I found myself in an overreaction to something is, as I query it, I notice that it's not from the present. There may be something in the present that is an upset, and legitimately an upset. However, most often, the degree of my response, when my response is dramatic, it's because I have made these other associations to other experiences in the past that were traumatic or unresolved. And so I think that if we would allow ourselves to recognize these moments when things come up, to say, okay, so what's going on here? Is this the present? We can do this with our thoughts too. So we might be making a judgment of ourselves. For instance, I'm so this, that, or the other thing. So I'm so stupid. And we could say, is that true? Where does that messaging come from? Is that mine? Or have I adopted that from someplace else? Is that external? Was it a message that was taught to me that I just took on as true, that I just believed? And this is how we can start to reclaim portions of ourselves that have been obscured to us by beliefs, by past interactions, by past traumas. I'm wondering, does this resonate for you? Is this making sense? Can you see places in your life where you were essentially taught to judge yourself harshly? And what can be really powerful in that kind of inquiry is to say, well, where did that judgment come from? Is that actually my judgment? Was it taught to me by my parents? Was it taught to me by the culture? Because as we free ourselves from these automatic, programmed kinds of judgments and assessments, it can allow us to reclaim and remember our wholeness and to be embracing and accepting parts of ourselves that have been wounded, and to be accepting them and embracing them with compassion, to move into healing them as we might a child, rather than berating a child and saying, how could you do that? That's so stupid, rather than comforting a child, while still being clear that certain things are appropriate and certain things are not. I mean, we may act inappropriately at times. And I think it's important to make a distinction between who we are and how we behave. That we are not our behavior. That we don't need to be defined by that behavior. That we can live beyond our behavior. And it doesn't mean that we don't, let's say we behave badly. It doesn't mean we don't be responsible and accountable. For instance, making apologies when they're called for, and even apologizing to ourselves for acting out of alignment, perhaps, with our higher values. And this is also a part of reclaiming our wholeness. An incredibly powerful tool in that process is curiosity. Curiosity is the antidote to judgment. So if we can allow ourselves to be curious, we can gain insight rather than judgment. And we live in a very judgmental culture. And we're raised to think that if we do something as children, if we do something that we get hollered at, that makes us for that we get hollered at for, that somehow makes us bad as beings. And we integrate this at a very, very young age. So it becomes sort of an imprint. And then we get to spend the rest of our lives, once we become conscious of it, trying to undo that damage, undo that programming, right? And we have all these triggers that go back to that kind of programming, right? That somebody says or does something that reminds us and sets us off back into being that 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old or whatever, who was berated for doing something, acting a certain way, and then we integrate that as a judgment upon our being, our beingness. And so finding a path out of that, finding a path beyond that, to reclaim ourselves, to allow ourselves to be enough, that without having to do anything more, to allow ourselves to be whole, takes an active choice, because we're so conditioned otherwise. And so we get to actively recondition ourselves to say, to know that we're enough just by virtue of being here, regardless of what we're told by parents or by culture. Because we have a culture that is very competitive and acquisitive, acquiring, very materialistic, that is very focused on external values, like how we look, what we own, how we dress, who we know, all these externalities, what we do for a living, how much money we earn, etc., that we're taught to value ourselves based on all these externalities. How much we get accomplished in the world, the doingness, rather than being valued and valuable, valuing ourselves just by virtue of our being. Just here as a contribution to life. And creating our own meaning and recognizing our own worthiness just by virtue of being. We're worthy of the beauty of the world. And we don't necessarily treat ourselves that way, nor do we necessarily treat others that way. It's very easy to be swept into or to be a reflection of this consensus sort of consciousness, this consensus reality that is based in having to earn your worth. In order to be worthy, in order to be enough, that you have to do something, you have to prove something to be enough. And I'm talking about innately enough. I'm not talking about like in relationship. In relationships, there's give and take, right? I'm talking about innate worth, innate value, that that we are enough just by virtue of being. But that doesn't mean, you know, in a relationship, that's a whole different story. There's give and take, right? There's some sort of reciprocity in relationships. And if we can bring that wholeness and that sense of compassion that we can cultivate for ourselves into our communications with those we love, if we can move from curiosity rather than judgment. And it sounds really easy and it's very simple, but not necessarily easy. I think we all know that because we're so conditioned. But in this remembering wholeness, we just have the illusion of these fractures. I know for so much of my life, I experienced myself as broken. Like there was definitely something wrong in my experience of myself. That's how I perceived it. And what if there's nothing wrong? What if there's actually nothing wrong? Even with all our challenges, even with all the range of emotions that we might be experiencing, even with our reactivity, even what if it's all part of it? What if it's all part of our journey? And even the tough stuff serves to be a foil for our growth. What if it's all okay? Might not feel good. It might not feel good. But this goes to the idea of pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. So what does that mean? We are going to experience pain, and we can allow that to move through. When we hold that pain, when we keep recreating it, that's when we move into suffering. When we generate that pain over and over and over again, that's when we suffer. And we do that by repeating certain thought patterns over and over. Is there anything wrong with that? Like innately? No. Except it's not pleasant, right? And we suffer until we don't. But it's years and years ago, I had the opportunity to volunteer at an event for the Dalai Lama. And the thing that I came away with that I think will follow me for the rest of my life, probably, or that I will bring with me, is that all suffering is a result of misconceptualization. In other words, the way that we think about something. And what we're talking about here is introducing curiosity to allow us to move beyond those patterns of thought that create suffering, to be curious about it rather than judging. And it takes will. It takes will to generate that curiosity. It takes will to step out of the suffering and victimhood that we might be experiencing. It takes will to shift the patterns of judgment for ourselves and for others. And it takes some courage too, because what we are doing oftentimes is stepping out of that consensus reality, which is really essential. It's really essential for us in order to be able to generate something new in the world, to be able to create the world that we desire to live into. Now more than ever, when there is so much judgment and so much separation that also has us separating and dissociating from ourselves, cultivating this curiosity and being willing to question our predispositions, our automatic behaviors, our automatic judgments and patterns. It takes will and courage to say, when people are engaged in all kinds of judgments, to say, well, maybe there's another perspective here. Whether we say it aloud or to ourselves. So remembering wholeness, reclaiming parts of ourselves that we have exiled, and also remembering that we're all connected. Rosalind says we can still feel it, but it doesn't have to stick. Absolutely. In fact, feeling it is the key to it not sticking. It's when we deny it, that we keep trying not to feel it, that it persists and it sticks to us. So thank you for that, Rosalind. Absolutely. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it is really, truly a privilege and a pleasure to have the opportunity to share these morning musings with you.